What happens when a quiet weekend getaway turns into something much more forbidden? A young man accepts an invitation to his friend's cabin, expecting laughter, games, and a break from the city. But instead, he finds himself face to face with a man he shouldn't want, the one person completely off limits, his best friend's father. This isn't just a BL webtoon trope. It's a yaoi romance you'll never forget. Our story begins with Ethan, 19, soft-spoken and a little shy. He's the kind of character you often see in a manhwa love story, kind-hearted but unsure of where he belongs. Ethan grew up in the city, surrounded by noise, expectations, and constant comparison. He often feels invisible, even in a crowd. Then there's his best friend, Lucas. Lucas is loud, confident, and the complete opposite of Ethan. The two have been inseparable since high school. Ethan admires Lucas's courage, while Lucas relies on Ethan's quiet strength. So, when Lucas invites Ethan to his family's cabin for a weekend trip, Ethan says yes. He imagines hiking trails, late-night talks, and maybe even a chance to forget about the pressure of university life. But what Ethan doesn't know is that the cabin holds more than fresh mountain air. It hides Mr. Carter, Lucas's father. Ethan had imagined the cabin dozens of times before the trip. In his mind, it was just wood, stone, and forest, a place for laughter with Lucas, card games by candlelight, maybe even a rare moment of peace away from the city's noise. What he hadn't expected was the man who opened the door. The storm clouds above the mountain broke just as their car pulled up the gravel path. Ethan's suitcase wheels clicked against the uneven stones, his sneakers damp from the drizzle. He was nervous, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was just the distance from home, the quiet of the wilderness, or the thought of spending 2 nights in a house that wasn't his. Lucas bounded ahead, carefree as always, his hoodie flapping behind him. "Dad," he called, voice echoing against the cabin walls. And then, there he was, Mr. Carter. He stood framed in the doorway, his presence filling more space than the heavy wooden frame around him. Ethan froze, suitcase slipping slightly from his hand. Mr. Carter was in his early 40s, but age seemed to sharpen rather than soften him. His build was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, posture so straight it revealed his past without words. Once a soldier, now a businessman. Ethan knew the facts from Lucas's stories, but stories had never captured this. His aura was strict but magnetic, like a figure drawn straight out of a romance manga panel. Dark eyes, unreadable, pinned Ethan where he stood. For a moment, Ethan felt like prey caught in the gaze of a predator, though there was nothing cruel in Mr. Carter's face, just intensity. Lucas shoved past, throwing his arms around, his father with half-hearted enthusiasm. Yeah, we made it. You don't need to look so serious, Dad." Mr. Carter gave a grunt that might have been a laugh. His eyes, however, didn't move from Ethan. The boy shifted awkwardly, heat rushing into his cheeks. He knew it was rude to stare, but his body betrayed him. Something about this man, his sheer presence, pulled Ethan in. The curve of his jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his shirt sleeves stretched against the muscle in his forearms. Every detail seemed too sharp, too vivid. "Ethan," Lucas said, dragging him forward. "You remember my dad, right?" Ethan's throat went dry. Yes, sir," he managed, voice softer than he intended. Mr. Carter nodded, still watching him, gaze unreadable. Then finally, he stepped aside. "Come in. You'll catch cold standing out there." The words were ordinary, but the tone, low, steady, commanding, settled deep inside Ethan's chest, echoing like thunder. He dragged his suitcase over the threshold, pulse loud in his ears. The cabin smelled of pine wood and faint smoke from the fireplace, the kind of scent that wrapped itself around you, grounding yet heavy. Lucas busied himself with unpacking snacks, humming off-key, oblivious to the tension. Ethan followed slowly, every sense heightened. He could feel Mr. Carter's presence even when the man wasn't directly in sight, like gravity tugging him into orbit. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. This was his best friend's father, the very definition of a forbidden love trope. Yet, as he sneaked another glance, he couldn't deny what pulled at him. Mr. Carter's hair was slightly damp from the drizzle outside, a few strands falling loose against his forehead. His shirt clung faintly to him from the humidity, outlining strength Ethan had no business noticing. Softly, Ethan's mind whispered excuses. It's just admiration. It's just nerves. You're imagining it. But when Mr. Carter finally turned his head and their eyes met again, Ethan knew it wasn't just imagination. The man's sharp gaze lingered just a moment too long. Not enough for Lucas to notice, but enough for Ethan to feel it. An invisible thread pulling tight between them. His breath caught. His chest burned. It felt like stepping into the opening scene of a BL webtoon, one of those panels where the protagonist's world shifts in an instant. The dining table was small, built from dark oak polish smoothed by years of use. Its surface gleamed faintly in the soft glow of the chandelier, a pool of golden light against the otherwise shadowed cabin interior. Beyond the window, the forest stretched in silence, branches rattling now and then in the mountain wind. The cabin felt like its own world, isolated, almost suspended between past and present, the old wood holding onto echoes of stories untold. Ethan sat on the left side, posture stiff, trying to appear relaxed though his nerves betrayed him. Beside him, Lucas sprawled casually, one arm slung across the back of his chair, his voice filling the space with constant chatter. Opposite them sat Mr. Carter, Lucas's father, Ethan's host, and the very reason the air seemed so charged tonight. Dinner was polite, but tense. Lucas complained about school, about professors, about his father's expectations. His fork clinked against the plate as he gestured dramatically, words spilling out with frustration. Classes are a nightmare this semester, he groaned, stabbing at his chicken. And don't even get me started on Professor Dawson. The guy practically breathes deadlines. He doesn't care if students are dying from stress. He just piles on more work. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm majoring in economics. What's the point if... Lucas. Mr. Carter's voice cut across the table like a low thunderclap. He hadn't raised it, not exactly, but the weight behind his tone was enough to halt Lucas mid-rant. Lucas frowned, sinking slightly in his chair. "What? Eat," Mr. Carter said simply. The single word carried finality, a command dressed as casual suggestion. He didn't look angry, merely firm, as though accustomed to being obeyed without question. Years of military training lingered in his posture, in the measured calm of his gestures. He carved his chicken with deliberate precision, each slice exact, almost ritualistic. Lucas rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath, but he obeyed, spearing another piece of food without further complaint. Ethan tried to focus on his plate. The roasted chicken was perfectly seasoned, tender beneath the crisp skin, paired with carrots glazed in butter and herbs that carried a faint sweetness. But every time his eyes strayed across the table, they collided with Mr. Carter's. The man didn't smile, didn't frown, he simply looked, as though trying to read something written across Ethan's face, and Ethan, despite himself, wanted to be read. There was something unsettling in that gaze, not cruel, not even openly curious, but intense, searching. Ethan could almost feel it brushing against his skin, unraveling him piece by piece. He shifted in his seat, reaching for his glass of water as if the cool liquid might steady him. Beside him, Lucas continued to fill the silence with stories about campus life. He talked about the noise of the dorms, the never-ending assignments, and how unfair it was that midterms seemed to land on the same week as his intramural games. Ethan responded with the occasional laugh or nod, but his mind wasn't truly with the conversation. It was caught somewhere else, caught on the man across from him. Mr. Carter's presence dominated the room without effort. He was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, his frame filling the chair with quiet authority. His short dark hair was dusted with the faintest trace of grey near the temples, the kind that made him look more distinguished than old. His features were sharp, cleanly cut, softened only by the faint lines earned through years of discipline and burden. His hands, steady as they guided the knife through the chicken, bore subtle scars, faint reminders of his soldiering days, and his eyes. They were sharp, deep, like storm clouds that refused to break. When they landed on Ethan, the rest of the cabin seemed to blur at the edges. Lucas reached for another helping of carrots, oblivious. So then I told Dawson, if he wanted us to actually learn anything, maybe he should stop treating us like robots. And you know what he said? He just stared at me like I was dirt under his shoe. Honestly, the man's a tyrant. I swear, the entire department exists just to torture me. Maybe, Ethan murmured, voice softer than he intended. Lucas huffed dramatically, leaning back in his chair. Maybe? You're supposed to be on my side, Ethan. Ethan smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. His thoughts were drifting again, slipping back toward Mr. Carter. He could feel the weight of that gaze still pressing against him, subtle but undeniable. For a moment, silence settled over the table. The clink of cutlery, the faint creak of wood as someone shifted, and the whisper of wind against the cabin walls filled the space. Then Mr. Carter spoke, his voice low and steady. Economics will teach you discipline, Lucas. Structure. If you can't handle a professor's deadlines, how do you expect to handle the world's? Lucas groaned audibly. Dad, please. Can we not turn dinner into another lecture? Mr. Carter didn't reply immediately. His attention flickered, just briefly back toward Ethan, as though weighing something unspoken. Then he returned to his meal, cutting another precise slice of chicken. The moment stretched, heavy with words unsaid. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Curiosity, attraction, something that shouldn't have existed, but burned quietly beneath the surface anyway. He took another sip of water, though his throat remained dry. Lucas, thankfully, launched into a new story, this one about a disastrous group project that ended with half the team failing the assignment. His tone was animated, dramatic, pulling the focus back to himself. Ethan nodded along, forcing himself to listen, but part of him wondered if Mr. Carter had ever looked at anyone else the way he'd been looking at him. The chandelier flickered faintly, as though stirred by the draft slipping through the old cabin's beams. Outside, the forest rustled, whispering secrets through the trees. The meal continued, but the tension at the table never fully eased. By the time the plates were nearly empty, Ethan realized he'd tasted little of what he'd eaten. His senses had been consumed not by flavor, but by the quiet electricity threading through the room, an invisible current that seemed to hum louder with each passing glance across the table. And though he told himself it was wrong, told himself it was nothing but imagination, One truth refused to be ignored. He wanted that gaze on him again. Ethan sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers tapping once, nervously, against the edge of his plate. Before him lay roasted chicken, carrots glazed in butter and potatoes baked with rosemary, comfort food, hearty and fragrant. His stomach should have been growling after the long journey, but his appetite had deserted him the moment he realized where his gaze kept drifting. Across from him, Mr. Carter cut his meal with methodical precision. Each movement was deliberate, measured, almost military in discipline. Knife slicing cleanly, fork steady, posture perfect. His expression revealed nothing. The dining room was warm, lit by a chandelier whose glow softened the hard lines of the wooden beams above. Outside, the forest swayed in the night wind, and the windows reflected flickers of candlelight back into the room. Ethan sat beside Lucas, his fork resting untouched against the edge of his plate. The scent of roasted chicken filled the air, mingled with the buttery sweetness of carrots and the earthy rosemary baked into the potatoes. It should have made him hungry, but instead his chest felt tight, his throat dry. Lucas, as always, filled the silence. "Classes are a nightmare this semester," he groaned, stabbing at his chicken like it had personally offended him. "And don't even get me started on Professor Dawson. The guy practically breathes deadlines. He doesn't care if students are dying from stress. He just piles on more work. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm majoring in economics. What's the point if you chose it?" His father's voice cut in, low and steady. The sound pulled Ethan's gaze across the table. Mr. Carter. He was eating slowly, knife and fork steady in his hands, posture straight, as though even here, at dinner, discipline couldn't slip. His words weren't sharp, not yet, but they carried weight. Lucas scowled. "You suggested it." "I gave advice," Mr. Carter corrected. His eyes flicked briefly to his son, then back to his plate. "You made the choice," Lucas muttered under his breath and returned to his food. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to smile, trying to play the quiet guest. But his nerves made it impossible to concentrate on Lucas's rant. His attention, like a compass that refused to point north, kept dragging itself back across the table to Mr. Carter. The man ate with precision, almost ritualistic, but there was something more than discipline in him, a stillness that seemed alive, watchful. Lucas didn't notice. Lucas never noticed. But Ethan did. Every few minutes, when Lucas's chatter grew loud, Mr. Carter's gaze would shift, steady and unflinching, toward Ethan. And Ethan, despite himself, let it catch him. Lucas leaned closer, jabbing his fork in Ethan's direction. "Tell me I'm not crazy, Ethan. You think economics is actually useful? Do you picture me running around Wall Street in a suit? Because I sure don't." Ethan startled, dragging his eyes back from where they'd lingered. "Oh, He cleared his throat. "It depends what you want to do, I guess." "Exactly," Lucas groaned, slumping back in his chair. "What I want to do is not sit in lectures all day listening to Dawson drone about supply chains." Mr. Carter's voice slid in again, calm but firm. "Complaining doesn't change the reality. Neither does pretending you know everything," Lucas shot back, his tone sharper than before. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. Ethan shifted in his chair, the clash between father and son pressing against his chest. He tried to take a bite of chicken, but the taste was distant, muted, his senses overrun by something else. Because when Lucas turned away in frustration, Ethan risked another glance, and there, across the table, those dark eyes were waiting for him again. It was the kind of look Ethan had seen in romance manga panels, sharp, magnetic, impossible to escape. Mr. Carter didn't smile, didn't frown. His face remained unreadable, but his eyes stayed fixed on Ethan like he was searching for something. Ethan's hand trembled faintly against the fork. Heat curled up the back of his neck. He told himself it was just curiosity, a father sizing up his son's friend. Nothing more. But the longer it went on, the less convincing that excuse became. It wasn't casual. It wasn't absent-minded. It was deliberate. Lucas kept talking, oblivious. He switched topics about dorm showers, about noisy roommates, about cafeteria food so bad it should be illegal. Ethan nodded in the right places, offered small hums of agreement, but his attention was frayed, pulled too thin. Every scrape of Mr. Carter's knife against porcelain sounded louder than it should. Every shift of his chair echoed like thunder in Ethan's ears, and every stolen glance across the table carried the same unbearable weight. At one point, Lucas dropped his napkin. Ethan bent down to grab it, too slow, because Mr. Carter had already leaned forward, reaching. Their hands brushed under the table, brief, accidental, but enough to jolt Ethan's chest. The contact was fleeting, gone in less than a second. Yet it left Ethan's skin buzzing, his breath caught somewhere between guilt and longing. Lucas popped back up, napkin in hand, oblivious. "Thanks, Dad," he said casually. But Ethan knew. He had felt it. That spark, that dangerous electricity, the one that could ignite an entire yaoi manhwa chapter from a single brush of skin. The dinner dragged on. Or maybe it was over too quickly. Ethan couldn't tell. His mind was a blur. His body caught between wanting to escape and wanting to stay. When Lucas finally leaned back, patting his stomach with satisfaction, Ethan realized his own plate was barely touched. His appetite had been devoured not by food but by tension. "Man, I'm full," Lucas sighed. "Ethan, you good?" Ethan nodded quickly, hiding the truth. "Yeah, great." Mr. Carter rose first, gathering plates. His movements were efficient, strong. The sleeves of his shirt tightened against the shape of his forearms as he stacked dishes. Ethan's eyes followed before he could stop them. Lucas was already talking about heading upstairs to call someone, but Ethan's body betrayed him again. He lingered. His hands stayed pressed against the table, knuckles pale, while his mind spun. He should follow Lucas. He should stand up, thank Mr. Carter politely, and retreat into safety. But he didn't move, because some part of him, despite knowing it was wrong, wanted one more glance, one more word, one more sign that the magnetic pull between them wasn't just his imagination. This wasn't just a meal. It was a scene written in silence, a forbidden love story inked not in words, but in stolen looks and the tension of unspoken desire. And Ethan, trembling at the edge of something dangerous, realized the truth. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be read. And across the table, he already had been. "You chose it," Mr. Carter interrupted, voice calm but firm. Lucas scowled. "You suggested it." "I gave advice," the older man corrected. His gaze lifted briefly, locking on his son with an authority that filled the room. "You made the choice." Lucas rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath, then turned his complaints back toward Ethan, seeking sympathy. Ethan offered a weak smile, nodding along, though the words barely registered, because every few minutes his eyes betrayed him. They wandered back across the table to the man who sat in silence yet somehow commanded more presence than Lucas's entire rant. Every time Ethan's gaze landed on Mr. Carter, he found the man already looking at him, or had just looked away, as though he'd been caught. The intensity of it sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. He told himself it was innocent. A father curious about his son's friend, nothing more. And yet, the way those eyes lingered was different, not casual, not dismissive. They lingered like a question waiting to be answered. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on his plate. The chicken was tender, the carrots sweet with butter, but every bite turned to ash on his tongue. His pulse thundered in his ears louder than the clink of cutlery. Lucas rambled on. And I swear, the dorm showers are worse than prison cells. You'd hate them, Ethan. No water pressure, mold everywhere, and my roommate snores so loud it could raise the dead. Ethan laughed politely, the sound thinner than usual. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Mr. Carter shift, just enough to rest his chin against his hand, elbow braced on the table. The pose was casual, but the eyes were fixed entirely on him. The man didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't break. It was as though Ethan's face had become a puzzle, something he was determined to solve. Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck, settling high in his cheeks. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The weight of that gaze pinned him down, leaving him exposed, vulnerable. Why is he looking at me like that? The silence stretched, or maybe it was only a second, and Ethan's racing thoughts made it feel longer. Either way, his chest tightened, and the words slipped into his mind before he could stop them. Read me, please, read me. His fork scraped against porcelain, loud enough to jolt him. Lucas glanced at him briefly, but then returned to his rant. Mr. Carter, however, didn't move, didn't blink, and Ethan, despite himself, wanted that gaze, wanted it enough to feel guilty, wanted it enough to hate the part of him that leaned into the pull instead of resisting. Dramatic pause. This was supposed to be a simple dinner at his best friend's cabin. Instead, it felt like a scene pulled straight from a BL webtoon, the shy protagonist caught under the watchful magnetic stare of someone completely forbidden. When the meal ended, Lucas stretched back in his chair, yawning. I'm stuffed. Ethan, you good? Ethan forced a nod, though his plate was barely touched. Mr. Carter rose first, collecting dishes with practiced ease. The muscles in his forearms flexed as he stacked the plates. Ethan's throat tightened again, and he quickly looked away, ashamed of the thoughts crowding his head. Lucas didn't notice. He never noticed. He was too busy complaining about Wi-Fi signals and how boring the mountains were. But Ethan noticed everything. Every step Mr. Carter took, every sound of porcelain against wood, every brush of presence when the man walked behind him, close enough that Ethan caught a faint whiff of cedar and smoke. It was intoxicating and terrifying. When the last dish was carried into the kitchen, silence finally fell. Lucas excused himself to text someone upstairs. Ethan lingered, hands gripping the edge of the table. He should follow Lucas. He should help with dishes. He should do anything except sit here, paralyzed, knowing that the next time Mr. Carter returned, their eyes would meet again. And yet, he stayed. Because deep inside, no matter how wrong it felt, Ethan wanted to be seen. That night, lying in the guest room, Ethan stared at the ceiling, replaying every glance, every silence, every brush of tension. He shouldn't feel this way. Lucas was his best friend. Mr. Carter was untouchable, yet the images wouldn't leave his mind. The doorway, the lingering eyes, the way his chest had tightened when their shoulders brushed while passing plates. It was dangerous. It was wrong. But it was real. And in the quiet of the cabin, Ethan whispered to himself what he couldn't say out loud. I noticed him, and he noticed me. From that moment, the line between guest and intruder blurs, between safety and danger, between friendship and temptation. On-screen keywords: BL webtoon, yaoi manhwa, gay romance story, romance manga, forbidden love trope. The first evening at the cabin is ordinary enough. Lucas drags Ethan upstairs, showing him the guest room. They laugh, they unpack snacks, they joke about horror movies. Ethan feels at ease until Mr. Carter calls them downstairs for dinner. The table is set simply: roasted chicken, vegetables, and a silence that feels heavy. Mr. Carter barely speaks, his gaze shifting between his son and Ethan. Lucas argues with his father about curfews and college choices, the same fight they always have. But Ethan notices something else. Every time he looks up, Mr. Carter's eyes meet his, dark and unreadable. Softly, Ethan swallows hard. He tells himself it's just his imagination. Later that night, Lucas falls asleep instantly, exhausted from their hike. Ethan, restless, goes downstairs for water. The cabin creaks under his steps, and there, sitting by the fireplace, is Mr. Carter, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Couldn't sleep?" the man asks, voice low, almost gentle. Ethan hesitates, then shakes his head. He feels like he's walked into the center of a yaoi manhwa trope, the late-night encounter, the forbidden closeness. Mr. Carter gestures to the chair beside him. Ethan sits, heart racing. They talk about school, about the city, about loneliness. For the first time, Ethan feels seen, not as Lucas's sidekick, but as himself. The days pass slowly, each moment layered with tension. A brush of hands when passing plates, a stare held too long, a moment in the woods when Ethan slips and Mr. Carter catches him, holding him too close, too firmly. Ethan struggles with guilt. Lucas is his best friend. This is his father. Yet, every romance manga instinct inside him screams that this is fate, a dangerous love story he cannot escape. By the second night, Ethan dreams about Mr. Carter, dreams that blur the line between fantasy and reality. When he wakes, flushed and ashamed, he finds the man standing in the doorway, as if he knew. "Ethan," Mr. Carter whispers, his voice rough, "you don't have to be afraid of what you're feeling." It's the most dangerous sentence Ethan has ever heard. The storm breaks on the third night. Rain lashes the cabin, thunder shakes the walls, and power flickers out. Lucas is fast asleep upstairs, headphones in, unaware of the war waging below. Ethan stands in the kitchen, staring out at the storm. Mr. Carter steps in behind him close enough to feel his breath on his neck. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan whispers, voice trembling. "Because I can't stop," Mr. Carter answers. The air crackles, not with thunder, but with something far more dangerous. Ethan turns, and in that single motion, all restraint shatters. Their lips meet, harsh, desperate, full of everything they've tried to deny. The kiss is not gentle, it's an explosion. Years of solitude and longing breaking open in one forbidden moment. Ethan's hands clutch at Mr. Carter's shirt. Mr. Carter holds him like he's afraid to ever let go. For a second, the storm outside feels quiet compared to the storm inside Ethan's heart. Then, just as suddenly, they pull apart, breathing hard, terrified, changed forever. Morning comes. The storm has passed, but nothing feels the same. Lucas still jokes, still drags Ethan outside, still talks about their next trip. But Ethan can't look at him the same way. Not when every glance at Mr. Carter feels like a secret burned into his skin. They don't speak of the kiss. Not then. Not ever, perhaps. But the story lingers, like every BL webtoon ending, unfinished, bittersweet, and unforgettable. Ethan leaves the cabin with a new truth. Sometimes love is messy, dangerous, and impossible, yet it still teaches us something. That we long to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved even in the wrong places. So, what do you think of this gay love story? Was it heartbreaking, sweet, emotional, or simply forbidden but beautiful? Comment your reaction below. And don't forget to subscribe for more BL Webtoon and Yaoi Manhwa story breakdowns. Check the description for full story links and more BL recommendations.